The night the whispers returned to the Beaumont house, the air over Chartres Street carried a heaviness that felt almost sentient. Oil lamps struggled against the damp New Orleans fog, their flickering light casting trembling silhouettes along the wrought iron balcony rails. Inside the mansion, beneath ceilings painted with fading cherubs, Eleanor Beaumont stood alone in the music room, her fingers hovering over the ivory keys of her mother's piano. She had not touched the instrument in years, not since the first disappearance. It began with the same sound that had haunted her at 12 years old, a soft tapping like fingernails striking old wood from behind the walls. Back then, the servants whispered that the house was settling with the humidity, but Eleanor had always known better. She remembered her mother's trembling hands, the nightgown stained with salt tears, and those late evenings when the parlor doors were locked as elders discussed the terms of the family's rise. That pact, spoken only in hushed tones, had shaped every corner of her life whether she admitted it or not. Now in 1860, years after she herself had become the Beaumont matriarch, the sound was back, and it was louder. She turned her face toward the hallway as the tapping traveled through the floorboards like a pulse. The mansion, once a symbol of the family's elegance, felt more like a creature breathing around her. The wallpaper, deep burgundy with golden vines, seemed to ripple in the lamplight, as though absorbing the echoes. Eleanor straightened her spine, refusing to give in to old superstitions. She carried herself with the practiced grace of a Southern lady, every movement deliberate, contained. But inside her chest, a pressure tightened. The same suffocating sensation she had felt the morning her sister Clara vanished without a trace. Clara had been the first taken by the pact. Even now, Eleanor could see the memory like a scene frozen in amber. Their father pacing through the mansion, crimson-faced, their mother on the porch, murmuring prayers into her clasped hands, the servants watching from the shadows, their expressions a mix of fear and resignation. No one questioned. No one dared to. The Beaumonts owed their prosperity, those sugarcane fields upriver, the lavish parties, the family's names stitched into the fabric of the city, to the pact sealed long before Eleanor's birth. Only the eldest children knew its terms. Only the heirs felt its noose. And now Eleanor's daughters were of age. As she moved toward the hallway, she heard a distant creak upstairs. Light, careful, almost human. She called for her maid, Josephine, but the house answered with silence. Even the cicadas outside had fallen quiet. Eleanor's slippers brushed against the polished floorboards as she ascended the staircase, the banister cool beneath her touch. The tapping grew sharper, like something impatient. At the landing, a faint draft drifted from the direction of the nursery. A strange place for a draft. Every window had been latched at sundown, as always. Eleanor pushed the door open and found the room swallowed in darkness, except for the moonlight pooling across the crib. It was empty now, of course. Her youngest daughters had outgrown it years ago. Yet the air still held the scent of lavender powder and old wood, memories preserved in dust. Then she saw it. Carved into the floorboards, near the base of the crib, was a symbol she had not seen since childhood. A looping sigil, shallow yet unmistakable, etched with the same shaky hand her mother once used to trace it on prayer candles. A mark of offering, a mark of debt. Her breath caught. Someone had been in this room. Or something. She knelt to touch the carving, her fingers trembling despite her will. The wood felt warm, as if recently traced, as if recently activated. Behind her, a light scuff echoed from the hallway. She rose slowly, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The tapping had stopped. The silence now felt heavier than sound. When she turned, she caught a glimpse, just the faintest silhouette, at the far end of the corridor. A figure small enough to be a child, still enough to be unreal. Eleanor blinked and the shape dissolved into the shadows. For a long moment, she stood frozen, caught between memory and dread. The sigil, the whispers, the tapping, none of it could be ignored any longer. The deadline of the pact was drawing near. She felt it tightening around her family like a closing fist, and deep within the walls of the old Beaumont mansion, something seemed to be waiting. Something that had been promised long ago. Something that had finally returned to collect. Morning light crept reluctantly into the Beaumont mansion, diluted by the lingering fog that clung to the Mississippi River. Eleanor stood at the dining table, her posture immaculate despite the unrest churning beneath her ribs. The long mahogany table was set for 6, though only 4 chairs were occupied. Her daughters, Adelaide, Lucille, Marianne, and the youngest, Celine, sat quietly, each absorbed in her own thoughts, as though the house's unease had seeped into their bones overnight. The silverware clinked softly. No one spoke. Adelaide, the eldest at 23, watched her mother with a sharpness that bordered on suspicion. Her dark hair framed a face that was a perfect mirror of the Beaumont lineage. Poised, regal, but shadowed by something unspoken. Lucille, 2 years younger, kept her eyes lowered, tracing invisible patterns on the linen tablecloth, as if afraid of catching whatever storm brewed in Eleanor's gaze. Marianne tapped her nails restlessly against her teacup, and Celine, barely 16, looked as though sleep had refused her entirely. Eleanor lifted her cup, but her hand faltered. The sigil on the nursery floor haunted her. It wasn't merely a symbol, it was a countdown. "Mother," Adelaide said finally, her voice a steady tremor. "We heard footsteps last night, near the west wing." Eleanor did not answer. She simply folded her napkin and placed it neatly beside her plate. "Was it one of the servants?" Adelaide pressed. But Eleanor knew the truth. The servants avoided the west wing after nightfall. They always had. Before she could respond, Josephine appeared at the doorway, her expression pinched. "Madam, there is someone at the gate." "Who?" Eleanor asked, though dread had already begun its slow crawl up her spine. "A man who claims he once worked for the family." Josephine hesitated. "He says his name is Thaddeus." The room froze. Thaddeus, the former house servant who had vanished shortly after Clara's disappearance. The one who, according to whispered rumors, had seen more than he ever should have. A freedman now, one with nothing to lose and too much to remember. Eleanor rose, smoothing her skirt with practiced composure. "Tell him I will speak with him outside." As she left the dining room, she felt Adelaide's stare burning into her back. Outside, the morning heat was beginning to seep into the flagstones. Thaddeus stood beyond the wrought iron gate, hat in hand, his posture respectful yet unyielding. He had aged, lines carved deep into his cheeks, but his eyes remained unsettlingly clear. "Miss Eleanor," he greeted. "Mrs. Beaumont," she corrected. He nodded once. "I came because the signs have returned." Eleanor tightened her grip on the parasol she hadn't realized she was clutching. "I don't know what you mean." Thaddeus gave a soft, humorless laugh. "You do. Just like your father did when the first marks appeared for Miss Clara." Her breath stilled. "You can pretend," he continued quietly. "But the house knows. And the city knows. Folks talk, madam. They say the Beaumont daughters are the next to be—" She cut him sharply. "Enough." Thaddeus stepped closer to the bars. "I'm trying to help. There are things moving in this city now. Strange things. You ain't the only ones hearing knocks behind walls anymore. It's stronger this time. Meaner." Eleanor felt a bitter heat rise in her throat. "Whatever you think you know, whatever you believe happened years ago, it was grief. Nothing more." "No, madam," he said calmly. "It was the pact." Her composure cracked. A fissure, small but undeniable. Thaddeus lowered his voice. "You still got time to break it, but not much. I can't do more than warn you." She wanted to dismiss him, turn her back, pretend none of this had crawled out of memory to torment her. But his next words stopped her cold. "I saw a girl in the upper window last night," he said. "Looked just like Miss Clara." Eleanor's pulse slammed painfully against her ribs. "No one lives in that room anymore," she whispered. "I know," Thaddeus replied. For a moment, the only sound was the rustle of magnolia leaves overhead. Eleanor felt the weight of her daughter's fate pressing down on her like the humid air. "You should leave," she said finally, forcing steel back into her spine. "And do not return." Thaddeus stepped back, tipping his hat, but his eyes held a warning that chilled her more than the tapping ever had. "When the house calls, madam," he murmured. It don't stop until it gets what it's owed. He turned and walked down the street, disappearing into the thinning mist. Eleanor remained at the gate long after he was gone, her thoughts spiraling. If Thaddeus had seen Clara's apparition, or something that wore her shape, then the pact wasn't merely awakening. It was choosing. Back inside, as Eleanor closed the front door, she heard a faint, unmistakable sound drifting from the second floor, a soft tapping, directly above her daughter's rooms. The third day after the sigil appeared, the Beaumont mansion seemed heavier, its walls saturated with an old, humid dread that clung like a second skin. Eleanor stood before her vanity, staring at her reflection as if it were an adversary. The morning sun cut sharp angles across the room, emphasizing the slight tremor in her hands. She had slept no more than an hour, haunted by the phantom steps that paced the west wing through the night. She pressed her fingertips to her temples. The pressure behind her eyes pulsed with the memory she had tried for decades to bury, Clara's last night. Her sister's laughter had echoed down these halls earlier that evening, light and unassuming, but their mother's reaction, stiff, pale, trembling, had told Eleanor that joy had no place in a house with a ticking debt. Later, Eleanor had awoken to whispers outside her bedroom door. Soft, urgent, her father pleading, her mother sobbing. The elders of the family repeating a single phrase like an incantation, "We must keep what we have earned." When morning came, Clara's bed was empty, and their mother's eyes were hollow in a way Eleanor never forgot. She touched her own face now, tracing the same hollowness forming beneath her cheekbones. Downstairs, a sudden crash broke the tense quiet. Eleanor rose and gathered her composure before stepping into the corridor. As she descended the staircase, she found Lucille in the parlor, standing rigid beside a toppled vase. Adelaide, arms crossed, loomed nearby, her expression a careful mask. "What happened?" Eleanor asked. Lucille's voice came out thin. "It fell." Adelaide's jaw tightened. "No, it didn't." Eleanor narrowed her gaze. "Speak plainly." Adelaide hesitated only a moment. She saw something in the mirror. Lucille turned sharply toward her sister, panic flashing in her eyes. "I didn't, Lucille." Eleanor's tone sliced through the room. "Tell me." Lucille's breath fluttered, her fingers twisted in the fabric of her dress. "I was arranging the lilies like you asked, and then I saw a shape behind me in the mirror." "A servant?" Eleanor offered, though her pulse had begun to quicken. Lucille shook her head, tears collecting. "It was small, like a girl. She was standing right behind me." A coldness slid through Eleanor's chest. "She whispered something," Lucille added, voice quivering. Adelaide stepped forward. "Tell her." Lucille swallowed. "She said, 'Not you first.'" Silence gripped the parlor like a physical force. Marianne appeared in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself as though bracing against a chill no one else felt. "Mother," she whispered, "Celine isn't in her room." The world beneath Eleanor shifted. They searched the house at once, every hallway, every unused room, even the attic stairs with their brittle creaks. The tension between the sisters worsened with each passing minute. Marianne blamed Adelaide's constant prying. Adelaide accused Lucille of frightening their youngest, and Lucille trembled so violently that Josephine led her to sit by the window. Eleanor climbed to the second floor, her heart hammering as she approached the west wing. The air grew colder the closer she came, as though the house itself was exhaling frost. She pushed open the door to the abandoned room, Clara's old bedroom. The shutters rattled despite the stillness outside. Dust motes floated like specters in the dim light. And there, in the center of the room, stood Celine. Her nightdress billowed slightly, though no wind touched it. Her back was turned, her head tilted as if listening to someone Eleanor could not see. "Celine," Eleanor said softly. The girl did not move. Eleanor stepped forward, her shoes muffled by the worn rug. "Sweetheart, look at me." Slowly, almost mechanically, Celine turned. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, reflecting something behind Eleanor, as if the space around her mother held more weight than the room itself. "I heard her," Celine said, her voice distant. Eleanor forced herself to breathe. "Who did you hear?" Celine lifted a trembling hand and pointed toward the corner of the room where shadows pooled unnaturally thick. The girl. She said she's been waiting. She said she remembers you. Eleanor swallowed hard. There was no one here. Celine shook her head. She said you left her. The floor seemed to tilt. Eleanor stepped forward, gathering Celine into her arms, the girl's body cold against her own. Listen to me, Eleanor whispered fiercely. You are safe. Nothing will harm you. But even as she said it, the tapping resumed, slow, deliberate, coming from beneath the floorboards of Clara's old room. Celine stiffened. She says that's not true. Eleanor tightened her embrace, her voice trembling despite her resolve. We're leaving this room. She pulled Celine toward the door. The tapping grew sharper, faster, as though something were following just beneath their feet. And as Eleanor stepped into the hallway, she felt a cold draft brush her cheek, like a breath. A whisper trailed behind her, soft as ash. You can't run from what you promised. By the time dusk settled over New Orleans, the Beaumont mansion felt like a vessel slowly filling with water, each hour dragging it further toward the inevitable. Lamps glowed weakly along the corridors, their light swallowed by corners that seemed darker than they had any right to be. Eleanor drifted through the house like a restless sentinel, her spine rigid, her senses honed to every creak and hitch of breath. Her daughters had retreated to their rooms after the incident in Clara's chamber, each one carrying her own brittle fear. Adelaide paced like a trapped animal behind her closed door. Lucille refused to leave Josephine's side. Marianne sought refuge in books she didn't truly read. And Celine hadn't spoken a single word since being pulled from the West Wing. Eleanor found her sitting near the parlor window now, hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the garden as if waiting for someone to appear in the shadows. The soft orange glow of the setting sun painted her features with an eerie stillness. Has she said anything? Eleanor asked Josephine in a low voice. Josephine shook her head. Not so much as a whisper. She just listens. Eleanor knelt beside her youngest daughter. Celine, she said gently, look at me. After a long beat, Celine's eyes shifted, slow, reluctant, toward her mother. But there was something distant in them, something that made Eleanor's stomach twist. A quiet grief settled behind the girl's gaze, as though she knew a truth she wished she could unhear. I won't let anything happen to you, Eleanor murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her daughter's ear. Celine blinked. You can't stop it. The words were soft, but they pierced Eleanor with the precision of a blade. Before she could respond, a sharp knock echoed from the front door, a startling, abrupt intrusion. Eleanor rose, tension coiling through her body. Stay with her, she instructed Josephine. She walked down the hallway, heels clicking in the hush, her breath caught somewhere between dread and determination. As she reached the foyer, she forced her shoulders square and opened the door. Thaddeus stood on the porch, hat in hand. His expression was grim. You shouldn't be here, Eleanor said, though a part of her felt an involuntary relief at the sight of another living person, someone not swallowed by the house's whispers. I know, Thaddeus replied, but you need to hear this. He stepped inside uninvited, the fading light outlining him like a warning. Eleanor shut the door, sealing them back into the suffocating quiet of the mansion. What is it? She asked. Thaddeus hesitated. The other families who made pacts like yours, they're having signs too. Disappearances, visions, animals found dead near their properties. Whatever has been sleepin' is wakin' everywhere. Eleanor's breath faltered. So this is not isolated. No, ma'am. But the Beaumont debt is the oldest. His eyes flicked toward the upper floor, where the girls' rooms lay in uneasy stillness. And the deepest. Eleanor clasped her hands to hide their shaking. I have managed this house for years. Nothing happened. The pact was dormant. You can't keep a sleeping storm from waking, Thaddeus said softly. It wakes when it's owed. Eleanor turned away, her jaw tightening. There must be something that can be done. There is, Thaddeus said, but it ain't simple, and it sure ain't painless. Before he could continue, a scream shattered the air, sharp, panicked, unmistakably feminine. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She ran, skirts twisting around her legs as she climbed the stairs with desperate haste. When she reached the landing, Adelaide stood in the hallway, pale, trembling, pointing toward Marianne's door. She saw something, Adelaide stammered. She won't come out. Eleanor pushed past her and flung open the door. Marianne huddled in the corner, staring at her own reflection in the mirror across the room, wide-eyed, breath shallow, as though she'd been confronted with a ghost. Eleanor crossed the room and knelt beside her. What did you see? Marianne lifted a trembling hand toward the mirror. It wasn't my reflection. Eleanor's voice barely held steady. What was it? Marianne swallowed hard. It was Clara. But not Clara. Her eyes were wrong, and she was mouthing something. Something about the fourth daughter. The fourth. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her. 4 daughters. 4 sacrifices. She had known it in her bones, even before the sigil returned. The pact was counting, measuring, choosing. Mother, Marianne whispered, clutching Eleanor's wrist. It said one of us is already marked. A coldness spread through Eleanor, deep and absolute. Which one? She whispered. Marianne shook her head helplessly. I don't know. Behind them, the mirror's surface seemed to tremble, just slightly, like breath-fogging glass. As Eleanor turned toward it, something pale flickered in its depths. Something small. Something waiting. Night swallowed the Beaumont mansion with a finality that felt deliberate, as though the darkness itself had been summoned. The lamps flickered weakly, their flames bowing against an unseen pressure that pulsed through the hallways. Eleanor moved with an almost feverish determination, Thaddeus trailing behind her as they descended into the old cellar, a place she had avoided for decades. The air grew colder with each step. The stone walls, seeped with humidity, seemed to close in. This is where it began, Thaddeus murmured, running his hand along the carved archway at the bottom of the stairwell. Your great-grandmother wrote the terms here. Blood, silence, and 4 daughters born of the family line. Eleanor's hands trembled, but she forced her composure to hold. Then this is where it must end. The cellar's center was marked by a circular pattern on the floor, barely visible unless one knew what to look for. Eleanor had seen it once in childhood, the night Clara disappeared. Her father had scrubbed it with such desperation that his hands bled. She stepped closer. The sigil pulsed faintly, as if remembering her. You can break it, Thaddeus said, but not without giving it what it already marked. It don't let go willingly. Eleanor closed her eyes. Her daughters' faces swam before her. Adelaide's sharp intelligence, Lucille's trembling gentleness, Marianne's guarded heart, Celine's fragile innocence. One was already marked, but she didn't know which. If you fight it wrong, Thaddeus warned, it takes more. It always takes more. Before Eleanor could respond, a loud, resonant thud echoed from upstairs, then another, then a scream. Celine's voice. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She ran, through the corridors, up the staircase, down the hallway where shadows seemed to stretch like fingers reaching for her. She burst into the girls' wing and found her 3 eldest daughters huddled near the door of the west wing, faces pale, eyes wide. She's in Clara's room again, Adelaide whispered. Mother. She went on her own. Eleanor pushed past them. The door creaked open. Celine stood at the center of the room, the moonlight falling over her as if spotlighting a performer. The air around her shimmered, faint, cold, unnatural. She turned slowly, her eyes reflecting something Eleanor had prayed she would never see. Recognition. Clara was here, Celine whispered. Eleanor approached carefully. Sweetheart, you need to come to me. Celine tilted her head, listening to something in the silence. She said she never left. She said she was promised. All of us were promised. Eleanor's voice broke. No, you were never promised. None of you. Celine blinked, and a tear slid down her cheek. Mother, she says you knew. A crack tore through Eleanor's heart. I was a child, I didn't understand. I thought I could stop it when I grew older. The tapping began again beneath the floorboards, violent now, like fists pounding from below. The moonlight dimmed, swallowed by an invisible force. The walls seemed to breathe. The sigil carved into the wooden floor of the nursery glowed faintly in the corner. Adelaide, Lucille, and Marianne stood at the threshold, frozen in fear. Celine looked at her mother one last time. "She says it's me." Eleanor's scream tore from her throat. "No!" A wind exploded through the room, ripping through curtains, forcing the shutters open with a crash. The floorboards beneath Celine burst upward, splintering, revealing a depth that should not have existed. A void, dark and hungry, opened beneath her. Eleanor lunged, grabbing her daughter's arm. For a second, a single, shattering second, she held her, felt her warmth, her weight. "Please," Eleanor sobbed. "Please don't take her." A whisper rose from the void. "A promise must be kept." Celine's fingers slipped from Eleanor's grasp. The darkness swallowed her whole. The room fell silent. Eleanor collapsed to the floor, trembling, her daughters crying behind her, their grief echoing through the house. Thaddeus arrived moments later, but the horror was already done. The pact had taken what it believed was owed, and it was not finished. The next morning, Eleanor gathered her surviving daughters and fled the mansion. They left behind everything: the wealth, the estate, the legacy. New Orleans whispered about their disappearance for years. The Beaumont name faded from the city's social circles, replaced by rumors, curses, and ghost stories whispered in French Quarter alleys. The mansion stood empty thereafter. Some nights, passers-by swore they heard tapping from within its walls. Others claimed they saw a young girl at the window, her nightdress billowing in an unfelt wind. But no one dared enter, and the Beaumont line, once so gilded, dissolved quietly into the shadows. Only Eleanor lived long enough to understand the final truth. The pact had never wanted 4 daughters. It had wanted them all. If this story sent chills down your spine, it's your turn to act. Leave a like to support the channel. Comment what you think really happened to the Beaumont daughters. Subscribe for more hidden and forbidden stories from American history. Share this video with someone who loves dark mysteries. Your engagement helps this channel continue uncovering secrets that were never meant to be revealed.